This story is not for the faint of heart. Fear is a part of you. There's no turning back. The nightmare has begun. The prison gates slammed shut behind David Hall with a deafening clang, a sound that carried more weight than he was ready for. Cold, heavy, vinyl. He inhaled sharply, but the air inside the compound was thick, suffocating, a cocktail of sweat, rust, and something else. Something darker. He was innocent. That was the truth. But truth didn't matter here. The guards walked him down the narrow corridor without a word. They didn't have to speak. Their faces told the whole story. Dead eyes, hollowed out souls, worn down by the things they had seen or done. The way they held their batons wasn't casual. It was instinctual. They shoved him into his cell, and the door slammed behind him. The room was small, damp, and lifeless. A slab of metal pretended to be a bed, bolted to the floor. The toilet in the corner smelled of abandonment, and the walls, etched with deep scratches, whispered stories of those who came before him. Some had carved their names, others had left messages. David traced his fingers over one that stood out. Time doesn't move here. A chill ran through his spine. He had never feared silence before, but this wasn't silence. This was the absence of sound in a way that felt unnatural. No distant voices, no rattling chains, no echoes of footsteps. Just a vacuum of existence, as if a cell had swallowed everything whole. Night came fast, too fast. The fluorescent bulb above flickered violently before plunging him into complete darkness. His heartbeat was the only thing he could hear now, pounding against his ribs like fists on a door. Then the whisper came. "They're watching." David stiffened. His breath hitched. The voice was inside the cell. He turned, but the shadows were thick, shifting unnaturally. His mind scrambled for a rational explanation. Maybe it was a trick of acoustics. Maybe his brain was adjusting to the isolation. Then the knocking started. Slow, deliberate. Not from the cell door. Not from outside. From inside the walls. T-A-P, T-A-P, T-A-P-A rhythm. Uncomfortably patient. David's skin crawled. He pressed his back against the cold metal bed frame, listening as the knocking traveled, moving from one side of the cell to another, as if something were pacing between the cracks of reality. Another whisper. "You don't belong here." It wasn't his voice. It wasn't in his head. It was something else. Something that had been waiting for him. The first night had been a warning. David sat on the edge of his cot, his body stiff, his pulse erratic. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. The whisper, the tapping, the unnatural silence, it had infected his mind like a parasite, burrowing deep, making itself at home. Morning was no salvation. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, flickering slightly. He waited for the guards, for some indication of routine, breakfast, roll call, something normal. But nothing came. No voices, no movement, no sound beyond the distant hum of electricity crawling through the walls. He finally stepped to the bars, gripping the cold metal. "Hello." His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. Nothing. Then, footsteps. Slow, heavy. Not from the hallway, but from the adjacent cell. David pressed his face to the bars, straining to see through the gaps. The cell next to his was shrouded in shadow, but there was someone standing just beyond the reach of the dim light. "Hey," he called. "Who's there?" Silence. Then the figure moved, stepping forward, revealing itself inch by inch. David's stomach twisted. The man was wrong. His uniform hung loosely on his skeletal frame, his eyes dark and vacant. His skin looked stretched, like it didn't quite belong to him, and his lips, dry, cracked, unmoving, hovered just barely open. David shivered. "Where are the others?" he asked, more to himself than to the man. The inmate tilted his head. "Gone." David's breath hitched. "What do you mean, gone?" A pause. The man's neck twitched in a way that wasn't natural, like something beneath the skin was adjusting itself. "They took them." David's fingers tightened around the bars. "Who? The guards?" Another silence, then a whisper, low, hoarse, almost conspiratorial. "Not them. The ones inside the walls." The lights overhead sputtered violently, casting momentary darkness. In that brief void, David swore he saw the man's face change, the features melting, shifting, replaced by something raw and unformed. Then the light returned. The cell next to him was empty. David stumbled back, his breath ragged, his skin cold. There'd been someone there. He hadn't imagined it. But now, the bars were bare. The cell door was shut. No footsteps, no trace, no proof that anyone had stood there at all. Except for one thing, something new carved into the wall of his own cell. A message, 4 simple words: "Don't speak at night." David's blood ran ice cold. David didn't move for hours. He sat rigid on his cot, his back pressed against the cold wall, staring at the freshly carved message, "Don't speak at night." His fingers traced over the deep grooves in the concrete. It was fresh. Someone or something had put it there while he wasn't looking. The silence had changed. It wasn't just the absence of sound anymore. It was something breathing, watching, lurking beneath reality. When the fluorescent light overhead finally flickered back to life, he exhaled shakily, gripping onto its artificial glow like a lifeline. A loud clank shattered the quiet. David jolted upright as his cell door unlatched, not opening, but shifting slightly, as though inviting him to push it further. He didn't want to, but something in him needed to. Slowly, he stepped forward, placing a cautious hand against the cold metal. A deep breath. Then, with a trembling grip, he pushed. It creaked open. The hallway beyond was empty. The other cells were closed, but there were no guards, no inmates, no footsteps. Just endless concrete stretching into flickering shadows. Something was wrong. David stepped out, heart pounding, and walked forward. His breath was shallow, his movements calculated. As he passed by the rows of doors, he felt eyes on him, not from the cells, but from the walls themselves. Then, a sound, a low scraping. He stopped. The noise was coming from behind a cell door. He hesitated, leaning in slightly. Another scrape, then breathing, deep, strained, almost inhuman. David clenched his fists. "Hello?" Silence. Then the peek hole in the door slid open. A single eye stared at him, bloodshot, twitching, unnatural. David stumbled back. "Who are you?" The breathing intensified. Then slowly the door started shaking. First a small vibration, then a violent rattling, as if something inside was slamming against it. David turned to run, but then he noticed something that froze him where he stood. All the other doors, every single one down the corridor, had their peek holes open now. Hundreds of eyes, watching, waiting, unmoving. David's breath hitched. Then the lights went out, and the knocking began. Not just from one door, from every door. Boom, 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 relentless, deafening. David covered his ears, stumbling backward, heart racing as whispers flooded the air, crawling over his skin. You see now, you shouldn't be here. You can't escape. The walls have taken you. David turned, running blindly through the black corridor, his hands grazing rough concrete as he fought for direction. The walls shifted under his touch, moving, pulsing, as though alive. Then something grabbed him. Not hands, fingers. Long, too many, stretching from the cracks in the walls, curling around his wrists, pulling him toward the dark. He screamed, but the prison was louder. David was still screaming when the hands vanished. The walls released him so suddenly that he fell onto the cold floor, his breath ragged, his muscles stiff with terror. The knocking had stopped. The whispers had gone silent. But the silence wasn't relief. It was worse. David pushed himself up, hands trembling, scanning the corridor. The lights flickered once weakly before failing completely. Pitch black. Then a noise, a slow, wet dripping. David didn't want to move, but something was behind him, something massive, breathing in the dark. He turned. Nothing. But the air was thick, humid, wrong. He wasn't alone. A voice, deep, guttural, starving, curled through the silence. Come inside. David's pulse stopped. Inside where? The floor beneath him creaked. Something shifted under his feet, like he wasn't standing on solid ground anymore, like something below him was moving. He stepped backward, but his foot hit metal. A door, a new door. It hadn't been there before. Come inside. The voice came again, so close, so deep, so wrong. David could feel the breath against his ear. Hot, damp, alive. He reached blindly for the door handle, yanking it open, and stepped inside. The room shouldn't exist. It was too large. The ceiling was too high. The walls were damp, pulsing like flesh. The air was thick with the scent that made David's stomach twist. Decay, blood, something spoiled and dying. Then, the sound. A slow chewing. David's breath caught in his throat. He scanned the room, his eyes adjusting to the dim red glow coming from some unseen source. He wasn't alone. Across the room, in the farthest shadows, was a table, and around it sat 6 figures. Inmate uniforms, motionless bodies, their heads lowered, their mouths moving, but their eyes were missing. David staggered back, heart hammering against his ribs. The figures chewed and swallowed, their throats convulsing with unnatural movements. Then, one of them stopped eating. Slowly, it raised its head. Its mouth was stretched unnaturally wide, its skin hanging loose over exposed bone. But David wasn't looking at its mouth. He was looking at its hands. Something moved inside them, something small, something wet. David's breath hitched. They were holding their own eyes. The inmate smiled and whispered, "You will join us soon." David crashed onto the ground, his skull rattling from the impact. His breath came in sharp, frantic gasps. His body ached. His mind screamed. The feeding room was gone. No table, no inmates, no staring hollow faces. But something had changed. The walls. They weren't walls anymore. They breathed. The concrete pulsed beneath his fingers, damp, warm, expanding and contracting like lungs. David pulled away, heart hammering, his fingers coated in something wet. He held them up in the dim light, dark, thick, red. Not water, not sweat, blood. The walls exhaled, pushing the air out in a slow, eerie rhythm. This prison was alive. Something was inside it, watching, waiting. David stumbled back, his breath shaking. The space around him felt smaller, the walls closing in, inch by inch, forcing him toward the center. Then the whispers returned, Not soft, not distant, right against his ear. You feel it now. You cannot leave. It is awake. David whirled around. Nothing, just shadows stretching unnaturally. Then came the knocking, not on the doors, not on the walls, from underneath the floor. A deep, thunderous boom, then another, and another. Something was beneath him. Something huge. Something trying to break free. The walls contracted faster, forcing him toward the center of the room, toward the knocking, toward the thing beneath the floor. David pressed against the farthest edge, but the surface moved, shifting under his fingers. The smell changed. No longer just blood, no longer just rot. Now it was burning flesh. A low hiss filled the air, like steam escaping from unseen cracks. David's pulse stopped. The walls twitched, the room shivering like it was adjusting itself. Then, hands. Not one, not two. Dozens. Long, skeletal fingers erupted from the walls, clawing at the empty space, stretching toward him, twitching with unnatural precision. The whispers grew louder. Let us in. Let us out. You will not last. David threw himself backward, heart pounding, sweat soaking his skin. But then the knocking stopped. The fingers froze, and the breathing returned. But this time, it wasn't coming from behind him. It was inside his head. You are already broken. Darkness swallowed everything, and David fell into the abyss. David woke up screaming. His lungs burned, his throat raw, his skin slick with cold sweat. His arms trembled violently as he pushed himself up, his pulse hammering so fast it felt like his chest would burst. The room was gone. No feeding table, no eyeless inmates, no suffocating walls. Instead, he found himself in absolute darkness, a cavernous space where no walls, no ceiling, no ground felt real. The air was thick, pressing against his body, like something was watching him, waiting. A slow breath, and then a voice, deep, guttural, starving. You should not be here. David flinched, his spine stiffening as the voice slithered into his thoughts. It wasn't spoken aloud. It was inside his head, burrowing deep into his skull like a parasite. He turned sharply, but his vision was worthless. Then, movement. Something shifted in the darkness. Not footsteps, not breathing. A slow, deliberate dragging. Something long scraping against the floor. David took a step back. His heartbeat pounded against his eardrums. Why do you resist? The thing stepped forward. It was wrong. Too long, too thin. Its body barely resembled something human, curled into itself, twitching unnaturally. The air stank, iron, sweat, burning flesh. David couldn't move. His muscles refused to obey. He felt the thing's presence like heat radiating off of something diseased. You are already broken. The thing twisted, slow, calculated. Its limbs bent at angles that shouldn't exist. Its movements not human, not natural, not right. David gasped as something shifted beneath his feet. The ground was moving, not shaking, not cracking, sinking. His boots pressed into the surface, not onto it, but into it. The floor wasn't solid anymore. It was skin, warm, software alive. David jerked backward, his breathing uneven, his fingers clawing at empty space. And then, the whispers. Not just one, not just two. Hundreds, crawling through the air like insects. You belong to us. You will break. There is no escape. The walls contracted. David stumbled as the space around him shrunk, forcing him toward the center. The ground pulsed, shivering like something beneath it was moving. And then the smell changed. No longer just blood, no longer just rot. Now it was burning flesh. A low hiss filled the air, like steam escaping from unseen cracks. David's pulse stopped. The walls twitched, adjusting themselves. And then, hands. Not one, not two, dozens. Long skeletal fingers erupted from the floor, clawing at the empty space, stretching toward him, twitching with unnatural precision. The whispers grew louder. Let us in. Let us out. You will not last. David threw himself backward, heart-pounding sweat soaking his skin. But then, the knocking returned. Not from the doors, not from the walls, from inside his skull. A final whisper, deep, ancient, unholy, slithered into his thoughts. You were never meant to leave. Darkness consumed everything, and David fell into the abyss. David was falling. The void swallowed him whole, suffocating his screams before they could escape his throat. No ground beneath him, no walls, no sense of direction. Just the vast, unrelenting blackness stretching infinitely in all directions. Then, impact. He hit the ground hard, his breath knocked from his lungs, cold, wet. The stone beneath him felt unnatural, pulsing like something alive. His vision blurred, his body aching. But as he struggled to sit up, his surroundings came into focus. Mirrors, hundreds, lining the walls, stretching endlessly in all directions, surrounding him like a prison within a prison. Their glass was warped, cracked, as though something had tried to break free from inside them. David exhaled shakily, his pulse erratic. Slowly, he turned his gaze to his own reflection. A pale, exhausted man stared back at him. Hollow eyes, trembling hands, a body that looked more like a ghost than a person. But something was wrong. His reflection wasn't moving. A chill ran down his spine. He raised his hand. His reflection stayed still. Then a whisper. He has always been here. David's body stiffened. He wasn't alone. He turned sharply, scanning the mirrors, and then he saw it. In the farthest mirror, where his reflection should have been, stood something else. Tall, thin, wrong. A body that stretched unnaturally. Too many joints, too many angles. Skin smooth like wax, mouth missing. Eyes deep black voids that swallowed the light. The hollow man. David stepped back, his breath shallow, his pulse hammering against his ribs. The hollow man tilted its head, slowly, unnaturally. Then it moved, not in the mirror, behind him. David whirled around, nothing, just empty darkness. The mirrors rattled, the glass vibrating, the air thickening with something unseen. Then, the voice, deep and ancient, not whispered anymore. Your mind is breaking. David staggered, his pulse pounding in his ears. The mirrors shook violently, distorting his reflection, bending reality itself. Then, the first crack appeared. A thin, jagged fracture crawling across the surface of the glass. Then another. Then, the shattering. The mirrors exploded, shards raining down, slicing into his skin, arms, legs, blood dripping onto the floor as the walls collapsed inward. David fell again, and the hollow man fell with him. The whispers grew deafening, screaming into his mind, their voices tearing through his skull. You were never meant to leave. Darkness consumed everything. David hit the floor hard, gasping, body aching, his limbs shaking violently. But when he opened his eyes, he was back in his cell, breathless, drenched in sweat, and on the wall, a new message, carved deep into the concrete. 4 words, words that made his blood run cold. You are already dead. David stared at the words carved into the wall. You are already dead. His breath was uneven, jagged, pulling in air that felt too thick, too heavy, too unnatural. The silence around him was suffocating, pressing against his skin like unseen hands. This wasn't panic anymore, it was acceptance. Somewhere deep in his mind, somewhere past the fear, past the screams, past the desperate attempts to rationalize, he knew the truth. There was no escape. Not from this cell, not from this prison, not from them. He pressed his fingers against the cold wall, tracing the letters with trembling hands. "You are already dead." The words felt final, permanent, like they had been waiting for him to read them for years. Then, the door unlocked. David froze. The heavy metal bolt slid free with a deafening click. The door, the same door that had never moved, never opened, never given him so much as an inch, was now wide open. Nothing beyond it, only the corridor, only darkness. This wasn't freedom. It was an invitation. David swallowed hard, his pulse hammering against his ribs. He stepped forward, his feet dragging against the floor, his limbs weighted with exhaustion, terror, and something else. A quiet, sinking certainty. The hallway stretched endlessly, cell doors perfectly aligned in eerie symmetry. The flickering fluorescent lights hummed weakly overhead, casting long shadows that stretched and moved as if alive. Then, the lights flickered, and when they came back, there was a door at the end of the hallway, a door that had never existed before. David's breath hitched. This wasn't metal. This wasn't part of the prison. It was wood, ancient, splintered, worn down as if thousands of hands had touched it before him. It had no handle, only a thin slit in the center. A mouth. David took a step back. The wall shifted, pressing inward, narrowing the corridor, forcing him toward the door. There is no way out. You are already inside. You were meant to be here. The whispers were close now, curling against his skin like breath from something unseen. David's knees shook. His breathing was shallow, uneven, ragged. Then, the door opened on its own. No movement, no creak, just darkness beyond it. David stepped inside. David stepped through the door. The air inside was wrong, thick, heavy. It pressed against his skin like unseen hands, crawling over him, sinking into his lungs. The room was empty. No windows, no exit. Only a chair in the center, and in front of it, a mirror. David hesitated, his breath ragged. He turned, reaching for the door behind him. It was gone. The walls had sealed themselves, trapping him inside. He stepped closer to the mirror, his pulse hammering. His reflection wasn't his own anymore. Not David, the hollow man. It stared at him, expressionless. Then, it moved, not as a reflection, as something real. David tried to scream, but no sound came out. The walls whispered, "You were always meant to be here." The chair dragged itself closer, screeching against the floor. David's body moved on its own, his limbs beyond his control. He sat down, and the mirror shattered. A wave of darkness swallowed everything, twisting, breaking, unraveling what remained of him. David was never seen again, because no one ever leaves, because the prison is alive. And now it has a new inmate.